Hello, Tubby and Coos fans. It's me, Candace, back at you again from the bookstore for another author event. I'm really excited today to be talking to Sam Schill. It is a book birthday for this book, Swallow. So we're really excited to talk to Sam about this book. It is a horror book. And I really think that if you are a fan of like 80s and 90s campy B horror movies, you will really like this book. So I'm really excited to talk to Sam today. Sam wrote her first story at the age of 9 after telling scary stories as a child. So we do have that in common. I wrote my first story, I think I was 8, but also love to tell scary stories. She's had a slew of jobs in retail, housekeeping. She even dabbled in tattooing, but writing has always been most natural to her. When she isn't reading or writing horror, Sam enjoys art and 90s music karaoke, which I'm also here for. Love it. And she lives in southeastern Kentucky with her family. So welcome, Sam.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. I love that you love 90s music karaoke because I'm a 90s child as well, and I am here for that. So can you tell us 3 things about yourself that are like fun facts that you think people should know that weren't in the bio that I just read?
I have heterochromia. Half of my right eye is brown and half of it is blue, greenish.
That's cool.
I like going on hikes in the woods. I feel comfortable in the woods. I live around a lot of them. And I love dogs.
Yay. I also love dogs. I love the woods as well, although I'm not a big hiker, but I do love like being in the woods, like to go stay at a cabin in the woods or something. I would love that. Or like to like live in the woods. That would be awesome.
So quiet and peaceful.
Yeah, it's great. So let's talk about this book a little bit. So why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about this book and what it's about, if they haven't heard of it or read it yet.
Sorry, what was that?
Oh, sorry. Do you want to tell people what the book is about if they haven't like read it yet? Can you give them a little synopsis of what the book is? Yeah.
It's about a bullied girl who seeks dark magic to get revenge on her bullies, but it kind of goes wrong.
It definitely does go wrong.
Kind of gets in a mess that keeps spiraling.
Yes, and like you said, the premise of this book is bullying. The main character, Mildred, gets like bullied by literally like everyone. Like everyone hates Mildred. And it's, it's always like, oh, you're fat, or oh, you're, what is it? I don't know, like change your body. Everybody hates you. That's mainly what Mildred hears. And the main character, like the adults in her life as well, don't really listen to her or seem to care about the bullying. Like she goes and tries to do the right thing and tell adults that this is happening, and they're kind of just like, meh, deal with it. And so that's when she sort of like turns to like cursing and witches and supernatural ways, because she's not getting help any other way. So I'm curious as to if you have like real life experience with this, with like being bullied and having adults not helping. I do, and so I like really related to that. So
I do somewhat, but really I needed to have a story. I had to have her not get help. I know this day and age, it's less common, like someone will stand up and help. But if that happened, then we wouldn't have a story.
Right.
So it kind of, that also gives it like a 90s vibe, because.
And I was a 90s kid. And yeah, you like back then it was just like, no, just deal with it however you can. Like the adults didn't help as much as they do now. So yeah, I definitely related to that a little bit, and I was like, oh, did this happen to you as well? Because it's a thing that used to happen. Anyway, I don't know about it anymore. I don't have kids, so I'm not sure. But also Mildred, like I want to know a little bit more about Mildred and why you gave her this journey and like how she came about, because she's definitely a character that like you root for her because, you know, of course the bullies are horrible and you don't want the bullies to win. But like Mildred's also kind of hard to like. And like as the book goes on, it gets more and more difficult to root for her. And I don't want to give a lot of spoilers, but like you always agree with her. Like you're always against the bullies, but also like her methods make it a bit difficult sometimes.
Right.
So I'm wondering like about this character and the development of her and like why you chose to give her that journey.
Well, it started with the idea that what if someone could eat another person's attributes and take them into their self. That was the whole idea. Mildred came later. She's the person that filled in that space of, you know, what kind of person would be this desperate to do something like this. So that's how she was born.
Okay, so yeah, so the idea came to you first then, this idea
Right.
of like eating people and gaining their skills or whatever, which is really interesting because you see this in like superhero stuff a lot where like superheroes can like absorb other superpowers or whatever, and it happens in X-Men where it's like, oh, through science we can, you know, steal superpowers. And so I think it's interesting because in here it's not superheroes, but yeah, this whole idea of like, let's eat a person and we can gain things from what they have. It's like so dark.
That was from a true crime.
What's true crime?
I can't remember his name exactly. I would have to look it up, but it's a Japanese name.
Okay.
He was Japanese and he went to school in like Italy, I believe, and he killed a classmate and cannibalized her, thinking that he could make him more attractive and smarter.
Wow.
That is where the whole idea came from.
That's dark. That it's like a real thing. Like that makes it even darker, honestly, that it came from like a true story. But that's not surprising that somebody was like, let's try this because, you know, people. But okay, so like Mildred has a friend kind of, Patsy Porter, who, and we were just talking about this before we went live, is like that friend that like you're BFFs with in middle school, and then you get to high school and people don't like you because you're like nerdy or whatever, you're not part of the popular crowd, and so your friend just completely dishes you because she's trying to fit into the popular crowd. So tell us a little bit about Patsy and where she came from, because she has a point of view in the book as well.
She actually had a very small part at first on Wattpad. When I wrote her on Wattpad, she was like the key later on. I don't want to say too much.
Yeah. No,
but people on Wattpad would be like, you know, they can comment on stuff on there.
right.
And they were saying, why does she care? Like asking questions about her. And I'm like, I'm going to have to give her more of a story in there. So.
Gotcha. And speaking of Wattpad, that's something I wanted to talk about too, because you first wrote this on Wattpad as a much shorter story. And for those watching who don't know what Wattpad is, it's kind of like a social media for writers and readers where writers can write and post things publicly on there, and then readers can go read whatever they want. You can comment on it. It's a way to get feedback on your writing too, a way to sort of test your writing out to see if people are going to like it, things like that. So Sam wrote this story on Wattpad, much shorter. So if you read it on Wattpad, you definitely want to buy it because it's way longer. You get a lot more of the story. And so what made you want to put your story on Wattpad? And why did you decide to use it?
I've always wrote here and there, and I wrote on Quizilla when that was a thing. Do you remember that?
No.
They had a site. Well, I think Nickelodeon bought it out, but people would write stories on there, and I wrote there. And then it totally changed when Nickelodeon took it over and they took everything down. So I went looking for somewhere to write, and that's really the first place that popped up. And I started reading on there, and it seemed pretty cool, and I kind of found a place there.
Cool. It is cool. And so how did your book go from Wattpad to being published by Wattpad? I guess published it, right? It's Macmillan, but Wattpad
I
publishes.
think they have a really good eye for what's good.
Yeah.
They they I wrote quite a few things before that, and then I started writing that, and I think I was on like chapter 6 online, and they messaged me and said, "Hey, we really like this. We want to represent it." And then the next thing I know, it's got like a million reads. So
Oh,
they
wow.
saw it coming.
That's awesome that you got so many reads online. That's really cool. There's a local author here too, Elise Arden, who writes the Casket Girl series, and she started off on Wattpad, and it was very similar. At the time, Wattpad wasn't like publishing physical books yet, but she wrote on Wattpad, and she garnered like 1 million views and ended up getting picked up to be published as well. So it's really cool that that can happen, right? That you're like putting your stories out there and that somebody recognizes like this is really cool, and then you just get a message saying like, cool, can we publish this? Like that's a cool thing
Yeah.
that happened,
And
right?
that is why I mentioned that I had written stuff before that. Some people are like, "Well, I wrote, but it's not happening." They give up. But you just need to write something else. Like write other things. Right? It may just not be the kind that they need in the market at the moment.
Right.
So just keep trying different stuff.
Keep trying. So to go back to the book, as I said in the introduction, it really reminded me of like an 80s or 90s campy horror movie, like B horror movie. So I do think people who like those B horror movies from back in the day would like this book. So I wanted to ask if that was intentional, and if so, why do it that way versus, I don't know, some sort of like other kind of horror you could have written.
Definitely, it was definitely on purpose. Those are my favorite kind of movies, and I always like a little bit of comedy in there to kind of take the horror down just a little bit and make it, I guess, readable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little more palatable. And we were talking about this a little bit as well before we went live, but kind of like that Kill Bill campy violence is the type of violence that is easier to digest, I think, than straight up just serious violence, which is sometimes hard. And so I think you did a good job with that. I mean, like,
Thank you.
trigger warning to everyone watching, like it is gory and violent. Like I'm not saying that it isn't. It's just the way that it's done and the type of violence that it is makes it like really readable. And what's really interesting too is that I was looking online earlier today just to like see what other people thought about the book, and even people who said they didn't like the book were all saying like, but I had to read until the end of it.
Yeah.
And that was really I was like, yeah, okay. So like it was really interesting to me, because it's like, well, even people who are like, no, this book was trash, was like, but it was so compelling and I had to know what happened. I read the whole thing in one sitting. So so that was interesting to me as well.
I really like that one.
And I think because like if you don't like those B horror 90s campy type of thing, if that's not what you're expecting, like if you expect straight up very serious horror when you read this book, you're going to be like, oh, that's not what this is. And so I think too that like just kind of know what you're getting into when you read it, and then it'll be fine. Like you will want to read this book all the way to the end if you read it, because you'll want to know how it all ends. So anyway, this book also made me think about people who can be like a hero to some people and a villain to other people, because that's sort of a theme in here, like that you can be both things, and like some people might think you're a hero and some people might think you're a villain, and also how observers can be like just as guilty as the actual attackers are. Both of those show up in this book in various ways, and I'm assuming that those messages were deliberate on your part. So can you tell us a little bit more why you chose to explore those particular themes?
Yeah, well, I wanted to show that bullying really how it affects both sides. And I'm glad all that came across, really, because I did try to show those very themes in there. Um, People may act a certain way in one situation because of how they're treated in another situation.
Right.
So I wanted to put a lot of gray areas in there.
Yeah, and it really is like, you know, we're all the villain in somebody's story, and we're all the hero in our own story, as well as in some, hopefully you're a hero in somebody else's story as well. And that came across pretty well, because it's like, I mean, Mildred herself is sort of both a hero and a villain, depending on how you look at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It all depends on point of view. And I thought it was really interesting because it sort of presented these questions of, whether you're a hero or a villain depends on who's telling the story, right? And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was important to also look at Mildred from another perspective, like Patsy's, to help see that she's not a lost cause and someone really does care deep down, but they're afraid.
Right. And that's so yeah, I know I mentioned earlier that Patsy is that friend because she is, but Patsy also still cares about Mildred. Like, it's not like Patsy is like, oh no, F Mildred, I don't care about her anymore. Like, she does care about Mildred. Um, Even though she's trying to distance herself at the beginning of the book anyway, she's trying to like distance herself from Mildred because she wants to be in with the popular group, but she does still care about Mildred. And that comes out more and more as the book goes along as well. One thing I thought was really interesting is that at the beginning, you kind of going back and forth between Mildred and Patsy, but then like the second half of the book has a lot more point of view changes than the first half. And in those point of views, like the bullies actually get point of view chapters, and you get a lot more information about the bullies. So like it allows you to sort of see them as people, but like you still don't feel necessarily bad for them because like they're still really mean and doing things.
Yeah.
But like it seemed like, okay, now these bullies are sort of being humanized. So I'm just wondering, with that, like, why did you decide to do this sort of later on versus giving them points of view from the beginning?
Well, in the beginning, the original one on Wattpad, there was only Mildred's point of view and Hyde's point of view and Ubiti's point of view. And I just felt like it added more layers. I asked the question at the end of one of my chapters, did people think Mildred was wrong for what she was doing? And almost everybody said no,
Yeah.
that they really deserved it. So I kind of felt like it was important to give them a story and let people kind of connect.
Yeah, and I think that was good. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like there's a lot of like revenge fantasy that I got from reading this book. Like, yeah, like duh, kill all the bullies. And so, there was definitely that feeling of, as someone who was bullied, and it's like, yeah, I wish I could have done this, kind of a thing. But you also like present these bullies as people as the story goes on, and like it kind of makes you pause a bit, like instead of going full on into that, pausing a bit and being like, well, I mean, these are people, even though they're like not great people, they're still people. And I think that's what those point of view chapters did, is more like humanized them versus
Right.
just having them be this like nebulous thing. It made you like kind of pause and like think about like, oh yeah, is what she's doing okay? I mean, you kind of still think it's okay, sort of.
Yeah, people are like,
Yeah, you like believe in Mildred, but not always in her methods, you know?
yeah, they're like, she's getting everything she wants. Like,
Yeah.
but there's a price.
But at a cost. Yeah, exactly. At a cost. We're not gonna like throw spoilers out there, but yeah, I think that that was just interesting to me, that you did that as well. So I want to talk about horror as a genre for a second as well, because it is said to be one of the more difficult genres to break into. So I'm wondering why you chose to write horror over other things. Like, what about it appeals to you?
Those are the kind of plots that come to me naturally. Usually, I can turn any situation scary. Like, it's anxiety. That's why.
It's like my sister is kind of like that as well. She loves true crime and you know, horror serial
Mhm.
killery things is what she likes. And she's always like just naturally thinking of various different ways to kill, like people like to kill people and like things like
Mhm.
that. So it seems like what you're saying, do you just have those thoughts too? Like, oh, how could I kill
Oh,
my
yeah.
characters today?
All the time. My friend got in her car and she just started to drive, and I was like, "You don't lock your doors?" And it's always things like that. I always think about it.
um yeah, and so that leads me to like a writing question for you. Like, how do you like, what is the best way as a writer, if there are any horror writers watching, what is the best way to scare people or like give them the chills or make something feel creepy when you're writing? Like, how do you do it?
The most important thing is a connection to the character. If the reader doesn't care about the character, they're not going to feel afraid for the characters. So that's the first thing you have to do.
Yeah. And then how do you create these like scary situations? Like, do you read a lot of true crime and stuff and pull from
I
there?
do. I read a lot. I watch on YouTube Bailey Sarian. Love her. Um, I watch it on TV, like Investigation Discovery is my favorite channel. I also watch a lot of horror movies. I read horror books, thrillers also, and I have since I can remember. I've watched horror movies. So,
Cool. And I know you mentioned earlier anime also, which is awesome. I know we have a lot of anime fans. I know, you know, Sam mentioned earlier that anime was an influence as well, which I love.
yeah,
Um,
I'm on into it when she's,
yeah. And okay, so with the true crime stuff, okay, so how do you then create suspense? Like, what do you do in your writing to make it feel like, oh crap, what's about to happen? You know what I mean?
you just have to gradually build up. A lot of people just skip like foreboding things and just go straight into horror, and you can't just hit people with horror like that. It has to start a little bit, like you hear a little creak and you're like, what was that? And then you kind of forget about it, but then there it is again, instead of just something just coming out of nowhere.
Yeah, I think that's true. Because like, I don't know, for me personally, I'm not a fan of like the jump out at you kind of horror. So I know that there are many fans of that out there. But that type of horror, I like, no, I don't like it. I much prefer the sort of like sinister, insipid horror that's like very subtle and that
Hmm.
is just like it's so much creepier to me than something just jumping out at me. And I mean, of course, like it's super creepy and things are happening and you're like, no, and then probably something jumps out eventually. Like, of course, something does have to happen, right? Like you can't, although that's
Right.
also not necessarily true. There are some horror things where it's just that like sort of sinister thing the whole time and nothing big happens. And sometimes that's worse. I don't, it's like, I don't want that feeling forever. Like have the thing
Yeah.
happen so that we can get over it, right?
Yeah, give a sense of ease and then bring it on. Yeah.
Exactly. Um, and so when you're writing particular scenes and you like really want to lean into the horror aspects of those scenes, how do you approach that like in your writing process?
Well, it's kind of like acting. Like I put my mind in that situation and see all the scary things and sort of like seeing a movie in a way or being part of a movie.
Yeah, so like putting yourself like, okay, this is the scene that I want, and then you like say, okay, I'm in this. What is happening, right? Like, and you take like, do you do it like by each sense? Like, do you say like, okay, what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I smelling? Or like, how do you kind of do
Honestly,
it?
I think what stands out the most. What's most important to know? What do I want people to see or feel?
Yeah, and then make them feel it, I guess. Yeah, because like again, like there's a lot of really creepy stuff that happens in this book. um and so again, like how did you, as far as the actual process goes of writing, how did you balance the horror stuff and the campy humor stuff? um like how did you decide like, okay, now I need a humorous moment, or now I'm gonna ramp up the horror?
That's kind of a natural thing that I didn't know that exactly where to put all that. I
Yeah,
just kind of went with it.
went with it. Yeah, and a lot of writers don't have answers to these questions, but I'm always curious as to like how deliberate is it? Like did you say, okay, now most of the time if this happens, it happens more in the like rewriting, editing phase where it's like, okay, now I want to like ramp up the horror. Okay, now I need to not. But some it you don't need, like you just write it and it just comes out. That's fine. But I always wonder um how deliberate people are, is always really interesting to me. If it just like comes out of you, or if it's like a deliberate, I need to think about this and do it. And are you a plotter or a pantser? Like, are you an outliner? Do you just kind of write?
I would say 20% plotter and the rest pantser.
So you have like a basic outline, like you kind of know where
I
you're going.
I start with an overall idea and I know an ending. I know some plot points that I need to get to in order to eventually get to the ending, but the rest is just pantsing.
Nice. I I really respect that approach. Like that people sort of like the hybrid, like, okay, I'm gonna like sketch out some things and then just go. Um I think that's like pantsers just completely fascinate me. I'm such a planner for everything. So when I'm doing any kind of like creative project, I am such like an outliner. I need to plan like every single thing out, every single step out. And I can't write until I do it, but it's just how my brain works, right? So I always have like respect for people who just sit down and write. It's like, oh man, I don't know if I could do that. I eventually can once I know everything.
Yeah,
um,
it kind of gets out of
so
hand. If I do try to plan, things usually go a little off. So
that's fair. And some people, I guess the other thing is that like you plan it out and then like for me, as long as like I know I don't have to follow that plan either. So if things start going in another direction, that's fine. I can follow whatever in whatever direction it goes.
Hmm.
But I don't know. Having the plan makes me feel safer, I guess. Makes me feel better. It's like, okay, in case I don't know where I'm going, I can always go back and look at this and be like, okay, that's where I'm going. And just
Hmm.
to have that reminder. Is good for me, really, in all aspects of life, vacations, like my business, whatever. Just kind of knowing a little bit of where I'm going is always helpful
Yeah.
for me. um, and another question I had is about the popularity of this genre. So, like, people have told stories about otherworldly, supernaturally, paranormal things, like pretty much since the beginning of time. So I'm wondering what you think it is that makes this kind of stuff such a perpetually popular genre with like horror, ghosts, demons, vampires, like that kind of it's just been around forever. So what do you think makes it so interesting that it's something that is lasting a long time?
I think people like to think that there's more out there than what we can see, what we know. And also, I think that horror is popular because, well, romance, it's going to have a happy ending. They're going to be together in the end. Um, that mysteries are going to be solved by the end. A lot of the way that the other things are going to end. But when it comes to horror, you're like, are they going to survive? Are they going to make it through or not? Like, you never know. And that's one big reason why I think people love to read horror and watch horror.
Yeah, I think so too. It's that unpredictability of
Mhm.
it. And don't get me wrong, I love a good predictable thing. I love a good romance. Like it's really good for me to like read like a horror thing and then read a romance thing and then like I like to sort of like palate cleanse stuff. It's like, okay, no, now I need something that's like nice because I don't know that I could read like two or three horror books back to back. So I like having those things, but I think you're right that it's like just this, you never know what it's going to be. I think it's one of the genres that is, you can be the most unpredictable with horrors and thrillers and stuff. Like you said, if it's a straight up mystery, at the end it's going to get resolved. But if it's horror or even like a psychological thriller kind of situation, like you don't know what's going to happen. um, and yeah, I do think that's what makes it interesting. I also think that like I agree with your point that people want to believe that there's more out there that exists. And yeah, like I love all the supernatural stuff. I'm here for it. I'm here for all of it. Love it. Um, so are you reading anything right now? Like, do you have any good book recommendations for us?
I just finished reading Stolen Tongues, which started as a Reddit story. Reddit
Interesting.
user wrote it. Felix Blackwell, I think is his last name.
Okay.
But it's really good. I mean, the most of it's really good. I wasn't crazy about the ending, but the build up was really good, and the villain in it is awesome. Like, very scary.
And what's the name of it again?
It's called Stolen Tongue.
Stolen Tongue. Okay, cool. I'm gonna look that one up. Um, I'm here for a good villain always. And I was just looking at looking it up to see like the description of the book, and it's like a romantic cabin getaway doesn't go exactly as planned, and it's like, yes, this is my kind of thing. It's like, okay, it's a romantic cabin getaway and then it goes very, very wrong, which is essentially like Evil Dead, which is like, let's go have a party in the woods. Like the worst idea ever. Why would you ever do cool. So that's Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell, if y'all are keeping up in the audience. And also I want to mention, if anyone watching has any questions, you can type them into the chat. And as long as they're appropriate, we will answer them. So just type them into the chat, and we will do our best if you have questions about this book. Again, we're talking about Swallow. This cover's really cool too. Tell us how this cover came about.
The cover was Wattpad books.
Ah, okay. So did they like designed it and everything? So did you have anything to do with it?
Well, they sent it to me. We went through a couple different ones. The first one wasn't really, it was actually a pomegranate, and I was like, no, I don't want to use a pomegranate. It doesn't really have, a grapefruit would be awesome to go with, what's in the story. And then Stephanie Meyer ended up using a pomegranate. So,
yep.
So, they gave me that one. No, they gave another one, and somebody else in marketing didn't like it, so it got scrapped. And then they came up with this one, but the swallow part was very plain, and I asked if we could kind of give it more of a horror vibe, and they got the one that was, it looks like lipstick. I think it was one from the other one that got tossed.
Yeah, this definitely looks like some sort of like lipstick or blood scrawling on a wall, like.
Yeah, I'm glad with the way that it turned out. People seem to really notice it and say, "Oh, it's got a pretty cover." So, and it still has blood on it. Like, it's a pretty cover,
yeah, like
but it's got blood.
It's still like, oh, this book is clearly a creepy book.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think it has that like mix of, oh yeah, it's a pretty color, but also it's disturbing. But I feel like that's the vibe of the book as well.
Yeah.
Like, this book is, at times it's like, oh, this is fun. Also, this is very disturbing now. Like, that's how you'll go through. You'll be like, okay. And yes, like, this is horror. So anyone watching, listen to me, anyone watching, if you decide to read it, just like all the horror trigger warnings, just FYI. I mean, that we've talked about eating people. We've talked about killing people. Like, this is a horror book. It's not, but it is the campy kind of horror. It's not like the super serious. It's still disturbing. It still is. So how have you been able to be creative during the pandemic? Have you had a hard time? Like, what have you done to try and stay creative? Has your life just not changed because writing?
Well, I worked I worked in a nursing home, so
wow.
I worked through the pandemic, and it got really times.
Yeah, wow.
Kind of helped in a way because I write horror, so
yeah,
a lot of horror was happening at the time.
I bet. And so what are you working on now? Is there anything that you can tell us about that you're in the midst of working on?
Yeah, I'm working on a thriller now. It's more light, so not as gory, but still it kind of goes with the same theme of like an inner turmoil, like do the right thing or not.
Cool. I'm into thrillers too. I like the psychological thrillers that like bring you through the ringer, where you're like, no. Really recently, I read a book called The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey, and technically it's sci-fi because it's about clones, but that is very secondary to the main plot, which is that a man clones his wife to make a more like subdued version of her so that she does
really good.
Wants. Oh yeah. And
what
it gets creepy. It's called The Echo Wife.
Echo Wife.
And that is one of those like super sinister. It's got like this underlying just creepy vibe the whole time.
It sounds
nothing like overtly creepy is happening. It's got this like, it's very subtle, and like it doesn't explode. Like you kind of think it's going to, but spoiler alert, it does not. It just kind of stays and then that just made it so much worse. It was like, no, the whole time I was reading that book, I was like, what is happening? So I like those kinds of thrillers that sort of like take you
Well,
through that ringer.
there are a lot of books and movies that aren't really horror or thriller, but they really come off that way.
Yeah, and I think this is sold as like a sci-fi thriller, so like I do think they say it's a thriller. It's just not like your typical thriller. Like there is a lot of science in it with the cloning and stuff, but
Mhm.
also it's more about the people and these relationships with this woman and her clone and the husband, and it's really messed up. I like messed up things. That's why everyone should read this book, which is really messed up, but in a good way. So yes, again, we have been talking about Swallow by Sam Schill, and this book is out today. So it is a book birthday, and this is very exciting that the book is out today. You can, of course, buy it here at Tubby and Coos if you want to. I really hope that if you're watching this, you would buy it from us. And so it is tubbyandcoos.com/event/Sam Schill, and that's where you can go and get all the information and order the book if you want to read it. And hopefully you do, because you will not want to, even if you don't like it, you won't want to put it down.
That's a good tagline.
And I think that's what you should tell people. Like, even people who didn't like this book couldn't stop reading it. I don't think that's a bad thing,
Yeah, I saw one person did a review on it, and they said I DNF'd it, and then like a week or so went by, and it changed.
And it was
And
like, wait, I picked this back up and finished it. That's funny. But yeah, like if you go onto Goodreads or whatever and look at the reviews, like quite a few of them, if you look at I just like looking at all reviews. It doesn't affect me, I'm not the author. So it's like I go and look, and like even the lower ones where it was like, no, this book was like, but I had to read it. So it was just really interesting to me. Do you read your reviews?
Yeah, I have read them. Um, I know that everybody's going to have a different opinion, though. I mean,
Sure.
I know everybody's not going to love it, and I know everybody's not going to hate it. So I go in with an open mind and knowing that it's not for me, really. It's for other readers, but
Yeah, that's true. Do you ever respond to them?
no,
I know some
no,
authors that do, and I'm like, why? Don't ever respond.
yeah, like they can have their opinions.
Yeah.
I'm just glad that they gave it a try, even if I noticed a lot of them horror didn't really seem to be their thing, but they still tried it. So awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool. Um, and yes, but for sure, if you like old school B horror movies, this is your thing. Like if you're into it. If you're into like super hardcore serious horror, I would probably say maybe not. You might be disappointed by what this is. But I mean, it is still horror. It is still eating people and stuff. So like it's still that. But I really enjoyed the sort of balance between like the campiness and the creepiness, I think, with this book. So hopefully more people will read it. Yay. And so this is a standalone book, right? You're not writing any other like books.
I could. I've got some stuff.
I'm
There could
just
be more.
wondering about like, oh, are we gonna see some of these people again at some point? Are you still writing on Wattpad?
I do. Not
Cool.
so much lately, but occasionally. I've got a lot of stuff behind the scenes on there saved as drafts.
Cool. And so where can people find you if they want to like look you up online, or if they want to follow your Wattpad, or if they want to know more about what you're up to?
I have Instagram, which is Sam Schill Writes. the same on Twitter, but I don't really use Twitter very much. Also have a TikTok, author Sam Schill, and that probably I'm on that more than other things.
Cool. I'll have to look you up on TikTok. I just established a TikTok for the bookstore not that long ago, so I only have like 6 posts on there. So yeah, I have just gotten onto TikTok, and for those watching, Book Talk is a huge thing. So there's a whole like sub area of TikTok that's like dedicated to books specifically, and it's very cool. So come follow all of the book people on TikTok. You can follow Sam there, and you can follow Tubby and Coos there. TikTok and Instagram are the main places where we are as well. And so I'm sure if you just like search for Sam's name, you could probably find it. But in most places, it's at Sam Schill Writes, right? And then on TikTok, it's author Sam Schill.
And
Okay.
on Wattpad, it's Pixie, PIXEE _ STYX.
And one more time, PIXEE
_ STYX.
on Wattpad. I'm typing this into the chat so that those who are watching, if you want to go look it up, and at Sam Schill Writes on Twitter. There you go. There's all of the. Oh, and on Instagram, what were you on Instagram? Is it Sam Schill Writes as well?
Yes.
And IG. So if you're watching, I just typed all of that into the chat, so so that you can go look Sam up on all of the things, and follow and see. I'm excited to see what you do next. I would definitely read more thrillers from you, so keep them coming.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for watching. We have had, just to let you know, Sam, there have been folks commenting like, "Ooh, I love these events," and that they were enjoying our conversation. And quite a few people were like, "Ooh, they're writers," and so they're like, "Oh, you're gonna go check Wattpad out." So that's kind of cool too.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for talking to me today. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you everyone for watching. Whether it's now or later, this will live on YouTube. So you can always go to our YouTube channel, which is just youtube.com/c/Tubby and Coos. And you can find all of our author events on there, all of our past ones. So thanks again, Sam. It was so nice talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
Everybody.